Hello world! Hackers have invented yet another way to steal files from a computer. The new technique exploits a computer's SATA cable to act as an antenna, so malware can send files to a nearby hacker-controlled receiver. Now, if you've ever put a PC together, you'll be familiar with SATA cables. They're used to connect things like hard drives to the motherboard, and given pretty much all computers use them, this technique will work on virtually all computers. However, obviously, such an exotic exfiltration technique is kinda redundant when malware can just send files to hackers over the internet. But that's not always possible. The research paper which explains this method describes this as a technique to extract data from air-gapped systems. In other words, computers with no internet connection. These computers are common in nuclear power stations, military facilities, banks, and so on. High-value targets where the convenience of internet access just isn't worth the risk of being hacked. However, hacks of these high-value air-gapped systems do happen every so often, but there's only 17 instances that we know about. And all of them had one thing in common. USB sticks were used to both infect the air-gapped computers as well as exfiltrate files. But this new research provides an alternative way to exfiltrate those files other than just the humble USB drive. In the researcher's scenario, an air-gapped computer would first have to be infected with malware, I imagine probably using a USB stick, but after which, the malware would create a covert communication channel by exploiting the fact that any cable can theoretically be used as an antenna. The researchers of course opted to exploit a computer's internal SATA cable. And after the malware encodes the target files for transmission, it would then perform certain read-write functions to and from the drive in order to generate a 6 GHz RF signal emanating from the SATA cable. In the researchers' proof of concept video, they do just this to transmit the string secret to a nearby computer, though it is pretty slow, taking a good few seconds to transmit what is effectively 6 bytes. But it does work, and is arguably more reliable than waiting for an employee to unwittingly insert a USB stick into the computer, something which may not even happen. In terms of countermeasures, the paper suggests software which performs random read-write operations to disrupt any transmissions. But that would wear down drives. I propose a much simpler solution of wrapping cables in aluminium foil, or better yet, using RF shielding tape that you can quite easily buy on Amazon. However, there are a few caveats to this exfiltration method, which themselves act as pretty good countermeasures. The technique works on 6 GHz, a frequency which just doesn't travel very far in air. The paper suggests a usable range of just 120 centimeters, so a receiver would have to be pretty close to the machine in order to grab anything at all. And then there's the other issue. The receiver would have to be able to listen on 6 GHz. An SDR receiver like the HackRF1 ought to do it, but it would need to be smuggled into the secure location, at which point an attacker might as well just smuggle in a USB stick and manually exfiltrate the files. So I can't imagine this method will see any real-world use, though it is admittedly pretty cool. And after doing some googling, I figured that the guy behind the research paper, one Dr. Mordecai Guri, is somewhat of an air-gap fanatic, if such a thing exists. He has what looks like a couple dozen papers, all on different ways of exfiltrating data from air-gapped computers, including turning a power supply into a speaker, modulating a screen's brightness, and transmitting data through a hard drive's LED, as well as a bunch more. I'll link his other papers in the description. Next up, a new operation targeting industrial control systems has been uncovered. Now, news like this is generally really pretty bad. It evokes memories of Stuxnet and the thoughts of the chaos that could ensue if something like the power grid was targeted. At the center of this newly discovered operation are something called PLCs, programmable logic controllers. These things are essentially industrial computers which control the operation of industrial machinery, like anything from centrifuges making highly enriched uranium to textile machines making knockoff Pikachu blankets. These things are pretty versatile and can be programmed to do almost anything in an industrial environment. But the security situation around them is pretty unique. PLCs are often quite old and insecure, but they're typically air-gapped, so hackers usually can't even get to them. And getting to them is the main hurdle to overcome if you wanted to, sabotage centrifuges used in Iran's nuclear program. And in the case of Stuxnet, it's thought malicious USB sticks were dropped around Iran's nuclear facility in the hope an unwitting employee would plug one in, which they did. But anyway, it seems that miscreants have figured out another way to reach those valuable PLCs. Researchers from Dragos have uncovered an army of posts on social media advertising software to crack the forgotten passwords to PLCs, because engineers also forget passwords and sometimes have to turn to Google to find a solution, just like the rest of us. This password cracking software actually does do what it says on the tin, kinda. You plug the PLC into your computer via a serial connection, click read pass, and the software tells you the credentials. It retrieves the password by exploiting a vulnerability in the PLC's firmware. But the strange part of this story is that the software doesn't actually do anything to the PLC. Far from being Stuxnet 2.0, the malice comes in the form of malware known as Sality being installed on the computer running the software rather than the PLC itself. Sality is actually pretty basic in the grand scheme of things. After adding the victim to its botnet, it does things like mine crypto on the infected computer, as well as monitor the clipboard for crypto wallet addresses, replacing them with its own hard-coded wallets, so victims unknowingly paste incorrect addresses, sending crypto to the bad actors. It's kind of ironic. The bad guys here have figured out a way to socially engineer the engineers themselves into providing them access to PLCs, but have used the opportunity to drop pretty basic malware onto the engineers' computers. That being said, in this case it looks like the miscreants are more so targeting the knockoff Pikachu blanket makers rather than uranium enrichment facilities. So I found posts advertising this kind of software in Facebook hacking groups. An odd string of words that. Facebook hacking groups. These groups are generally made up of people in and around India, so it looks like this whole operation is simply exploiting the Indian subcontinent's array of factories and their forgetful engineers to add more victims to their botnets. This is better, or should I say less worse, than what I initially thought when I started reading into this story, that this was some kind of espionage operation. Next up, 6 severe vulnerabilities have been found in a popular car tracking device, some of which could enable an attacker to effectively take over a victim's car. The culprit is this thing, the Mikadus MV720. The scale of the vulnerabilities is pretty embarrassing, and the manufacturer's apparent unwillingness to even fix the issues makes this so much worse, but we'll get to that shortly. To use the thing, you plug it into your car, then using its onboard GPS and cellular connection, you can control it via an app, where you can do things like track its location, set up geofencing to alert you if your car moves out of a predefined area. Also, if your car has been stolen, you can remotely cut off its fuel supply, even when it's moving, which they eloquently demonstrate on the product page. It has a load more features, and seems pretty useful. For less than £10 or $11, it seems like a steal, but what's the catch? Well, what isn't advertised are the 6 severe security vulnerabilities that come complimentary with every purchase. Cybersecurity company BitSight originally identified them last September, and did the obvious thing, alerting the manufacturer, or at least they tried to, several times, without any response. It eventually became clear that the people making these things probably didn't care, so BitSight was forced to publish a paper detailing all of the problems that are still to this day unpatched. For example, the HTTP communications used by the app to communicate with the server are unencrypted, allowing man-in-the-middle attacks to modify requests. But there are bigger problems, like the hard-coded master password which exists in each unit. But a bad actor probably wouldn't even need to use it, because all the devices come with the same default password, 123456. The problem is intensified because the device's ID numbers are sequential, so guessing them is easy. Given that these 2 pieces of information are all you need to log in, it's trivial to maliciously access 94% of accounts. I say 94% because that's the proportion of devices still using the default password according to BitSight. But this story wouldn't have even made it to the news if it wasn't for just how many of the devices there are out in the wild. 1.5 million are currently active, and BitSight found that they were being used by organizations including government agencies, military and law enforcement, along with just regular people. I found the trackers are still available for purchase on Amazon, eBay and AliExpress, where they're a bestseller. I'll of course link the full report in the description, and because of just how easy these things are to exploit, I'd be actually really quite surprised if there isn't already an army of trolls already trying to screw with them just for the hell of it. Now this video was made possible by Linode, who are giving you a $100 60-day credit just for signing up. Linode is essentially your Swiss Army knife for cloud computing. If it runs on Linux, it'll run on Linode. One great feature of Linode is their app marketplace, which makes it super easy to spin up servers with pre-configured software. For example, use Linode's Pi-hole app to set up a DNS sinkhole that you can use to block ads across all your devices. And yeah, I do recognise the irony in promoting ad blocking within an actual ad. Linode can run almost anything by providing all the tools a developer really needs at competitive prices. Use the link in the description now to claim your free $100. As always, thank you for watching. Sources can of course be found in the video description. Stay tuned for more hacking videos, and have a good one.